On the night of 26th March 1883, in the newly finished Vanderbilt mansion at 1660 Fifth Avenue, New York, a maid smoothed the creases from Alva Vanderbilt's long white gloves as gaslight flickered against gilded paneling. Journalists had been allowed in that afternoon to survey the decorations, an unprecedented invitation that turned a private event into a public spectacle. Alva adjusted each glove herself, a ritual gesture that was also strategy. The gloves completed the image of a society matron ready to receive over 1,000 guests and, more importantly, to force New York's old guard to acknowledge her. Outside, carriages jammed Fifth Avenue. Police held back crowds hoping to glimpse what the New York Times would call an event that had agitated New York society more than any social event in many years. Inside, musicians tuned instruments under new electric lights. The gloves were immaculate. The social order was not. The evening would look like triumph, but would be bought at a cost only letters and photographs would remember. In early spring 1858, in the sunlit house on Government Street in Mobile, Alabama, 5-year-old Alva Erskine Smith stacked books into imaginary walls and doorways in her father's library. The house, built by cotton merchant Murray Forbes Smith, had high ceilings and formal gardens, a setting that taught a child to move carefully under adult eyes. By 1859, as sectional tensions rose, the Smiths relocated to New York City, joining other Southern mercantile families shifting their businesses north. Passenger lists and city directories trace their movements. In each record, Alva appears as a daughter, whose future would depend on how gracefully she learned to inhabit these changing rooms. The child who arranged books like walls would one day arrange ballrooms like arguments. Already, space and status were linked. Within 25 years, that instinct would shape a mansion designed to force open the doors of New York society. Privilege began not as a ballroom, but as a room where a little girl learned how space could be controlled. After the Civil War, the Smith fortune fractured. In the late 1860s, surviving correspondence and biographical accounts record the family's move to France, where Alva was enrolled in private schools near Paris, including a boarding school at Neuilly-sur-Seine. Class registers show a pattern typical of elite Southerners whose capital had vanished. They exported their daughters to European finishing schools to convert diminished money into polished manners. In classrooms lit by gray Parisian daylight, Alva copied French verb tables, practiced piano, and learned to sit perfectly upright, fingers resting lightly in kid gloves. The curriculum, languages, music, drawing, catechism, matched the period's expectation that upper-class women become pleasing companions rather than professionals. Letters home, cited in later biographies, emphasize how fluent she became in French and how keenly she studied European architecture, wandering boulevards where old stone houses encoded centuries of privilege. Education promised refinement but quietly narrowed the future to roles requiring constant performance. Those French lessons would be converted into a new currency, the social ambition of the Vanderbilts. On 20th of April 1875, under the vaulted ceiling of Calvary Church in New York, Alva Smith married William Kissam Vanderbilt, grandson of railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt. Wedding notices in New York papers record the match. Later biographers and Alva's own testimony make clear it was, above all, a calculation. Her family had lost much of its wealth. He possessed a vast fortune but lacked old social standing. In marriage records and society columns, the alliance is framed as romantic. In private recollection, Alva described it as a way to rescue her family from bankruptcy and secure her own position. As she adjusted her gloves before walking down the aisle, she entered not just a marriage but a dynasty still barred from New York's most exclusive circle, the 400, curated by Mrs. Carolyn Astor and Ward McAllister. The ceremony's candlelight, music, and white satin veiled a contract in which affection mattered less than assets and access. A wedding day could feel like a coronation, yet function as an economic negotiation. To turn money into legitimacy, Alva would need more than a ring. She would need a stage large enough to unsettle Mrs. Astor herself. Between 1878 and 1882, building permits, architectural drawings, and correspondence with Richard Morris Hunt documented the creation of the Vanderbilt Petit Chateau at Fifth Avenue and 52nd Street. Inspired by French Renaissance townhouses Alva had admired in Paris, the mansion's limestone facade, steep roofs, and ornate interiors translated old world prestige into New York stone. Contemporaries recalled Alva knee deep in mortar, reviewing plans, an unusual level of female involvement in high style architecture. Hunt's office records show her insisting on a grand entrance hall, sweeping staircase, and ballroom suitable for tableaux vivants and quadrilles. Each balustrade, mirrored wall, and carved panel was part of a larger argument that the Vanderbilts were not merely rich but cultured. In commissioning architecture, Alva was constructing an identity, but bricks and marble could not alone secure recognition. The house would need a spectacle. By winter 1881, a typical day at 665th Avenue followed a pattern familiar from etiquette manuals. Late morning letters, afternoon calls, evening dinners. Household accounts show a small army of servants orchestrating the choreography. In the morning, Alva's secretary laid out engraved stationery. She sat at a gilt writing desk, gloved hands guiding a steel nib as she drafted thank you notes and issued invitations. The rustle of silk, the scratch of pen on paper, the clink of china teacups. These sounds were as much part of her education as any classroom. Calling card trays in the hall recorded who had performed the ritual social visit and who had not. A missing card from Mrs. Astor was more than an omission. It was a public verdict. Even in private, a society woman's handwriting was a visible record of her place in an invisible hierarchy. During the summer of 1880 in Newport, Rhode Island, passenger lists and society columns placed the Vanderbilts among the seasonal colonies transforming the quiet port into an American resort of palaces. Alva rented and visited properties while supervising the upbringing of her daughter, Consuelo, born in 1877. Diaries and later memoirs describe Consuelo's childhood as one of tutors, governesses, and constant reminders about carriage, diction, and poise. She practiced piano in rooms cooled by sea breezes, balanced books on her head to perfect her posture. Newport's informal drives and lawn parties were, in reality, rehearsals for more formal stages. Photographs from Newport's cottage era show girls in starched white dresses beside mothers in elaborate gowns, images that disguise how intensely they were being trained. For Alva, motherhood involved shaping a daughter into an instrument of social strategy. The lessons drilled into Consuelo would echo years later in another grand alliance. By late 1882, building accounts show the Petit Chateau nearly complete, its ballroom ready but untested. Around January 1883, Alva began planning a fancy dress housewarming ball for roughly 1,000 guests. Press speculation placed the cost at about $250,000, several million in today's money. Invitations, delivered by liveried servants, were themselves archival artifacts, heavy cardstock, engraved script, and the critical inclusion or exclusion of certain names. Surviving ticket lists and newspaper coverage reveal that almost every established family was invited, except conspicuously Miss Carrie Astor, whose mother had never paid Alva the formal call that etiquette required. In the weeks before 26th March, wardrobe lists, dressmaker bills, and costume sketches accumulated. Guests rehearsed assigned quadrilles. The ball was not simply a celebration. It was a logistical campaign executed in silk and light. The final decision, whom not to invite, would prove more influential than any decoration. On the evening of 26 March 1883, as workmen erected an awning over the entrance, crowds gathered. Police reports described carriages lining the avenue from early evening, with uniformed officers holding back onlookers. The next morning's New York Times opened with the observation that the Vanderbilt Ball has agitated New York society more than any social event that has occurred here in many years, noting that since its announcement scarcely anything else has been talked about. Inside, musicians tuned instruments under newly installed electric lights, while maids made last-minute adjustments to gloves and headpieces. Alva's decision to invite Reporters to preview the decorations ensured that even those not on the guest list would feel implicated in the night's display. By turning a private ball into public news, Alva transformed etiquette into a spectacle of power. Yet one ritual had to occur before the doors opened fully: the delivery of a single calling card from Mrs. Astor. In the weeks before 22nd March 1883, society gossip records a pointed absence. Mrs. Caroline Astor had still not formally called at the Vanderbilt house, and so, Alva insisted, etiquette prevented her from inviting Miss Carrie Astor to the ball. According to widely repeated accounts, Carrie had been rehearsing an elaborate quadrille and was devastated to learn she was not invited. Social pressure mounted until Mrs. Astor, recognizing that exclusion from the most talked about event of the decade would damage her own position, sent her calling card to 660 Fifth Avenue. A butler brought the card on a silver tray to Alva's morning room. That sliver of pasteboard functioned as a capitulation. In a world without votes or formal office, a woman like Alva used the tools available: ink, invitations, and the power to withhold access. Around 10 p.m. on 26th March, carriages began to disgorge New York's elite at the Vanderbilt mansion. Police reports, photographic portraits, and costume descriptions record a parade of courtiers, queens, and allegorical figures crossing the threshold. Inside the Great Hall, chandeliers and electric fixtures washed marble columns with light. In surviving photographs, guests stand in elaborate dress. Alice Claypool, Vanderbilt, as electric light, her gown of yellow satin wired to illuminate a handheld bulb. Others dressed as Venetian nobles and goddesses. At the top of the staircase, Alva, in her own richly embroidered costume, again adjusted her gloves before greeting each arrival. Dance cards show the sequence of quadrilles and waltzes that structured the night, assigning partners as carefully as any chessboard. The ball offered fantasy, but beneath the costumes the same hierarchies governed every step. During the height of the ball, observers remembered seeing Alva Vanderbilt and Mrs. Astor in animated conversation beneath the ballroom's painted ceiling. Later accounts attribute to Mrs. Astor a remark that the time has come for the Vanderbilts, an acknowledgement that the family could no longer be excluded from New York's highest circle. The consequences are clear in the social record. Not only did the Astros attend the Vanderbilt Ball, but they later invited the Vanderbilts to their own annual ball, the event that functioned as the unofficial roll call of the 400. Newspaper coverage and later chroniclers framed the night as the most extravagant affair of its kind which America had ever seen, linking its excess directly to a shift in social hierarchy. The victory belonged to Alva, but it confirmed a system in which women were valued for how well they served dynastic ambitions. A decade later, between 1888 and 1892, building contracts document the construction of Marble House on Bellevue Avenue, Newport, designed by Richard Morris Hunt, costing about $11 million, much of it spent on imported marble. The house was presented to Alva as a birthday gift in 1892. Photographs show an environment even more opulent than the Petit Chateau. Ceilings painted like European palaces, rooms gleaming with gilded furniture, a ballroom that dwarfed earlier spaces. In November 1895, in London, her daughter Consuelo married Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough, a match chronicled as the quintessential Dollar Princess alliance. The chart published before the wedding listed Consuelo's weight, dowry, and social attributes as though she were an asset sheet. The gloves, lessons, and balls had achieved their purpose. They had moved a Southern merchant's daughter into the heart of transatlantic power, but at the cost of turning women into instruments of family strategy. By March 1895, when Alva shocked society by divorcing William Vanderbilt on grounds of adultery, court records and press coverage show how rare such a step was among elite women. She received a vast settlement and retained properties like Marble House. In January 1917, now Alva Belmont, she stood behind the scenes of the first organized picketing of the White House by the National Woman's Party, which she helped found in 1916. Photographs show her funding headquarters, hosting strategy meetings, and using her Newport and New York houses for suffrage events. In these images, The familiar elements remain: carefully chosen dresses, controlled posture, gloves, but the context has shifted. The same skills that once orchestrated a ball now support a movement that questions women's lack of legal voice. Alva did not escape class privilege, but she redirected some of its tools against the political structures that had kept women dependent. Today, visitors walking through Marble House or examining costume ball photographs in archival reading rooms encounter a curated afterlife of the 1883 Vanderbilt ball. The electric light dress, preserved at the Museum of the City of New York, glows only under museum lighting now, its built-in battery long dormant. In one case, a pair of white gloves lies neatly arranged. In another, a dance card bears fading pencil marks next to the names of long-dead partners. The ballrooms are quiet. The calling cards have yellowed. Yet in these objects, gloves, invitations, portraits, the architecture of grace remains visible, beauty deployed as argument, refinement used as leverage, and every elegant gesture shadowed by the limits it once concealed. The image of Alva at the top of the staircase on 26 March 1883, adjusting her gloves before receiving Mrs. Astor, now looks less like triumph than a question we are still answering.